Medical Wound Care Center at Spring Hill Hospital in Mobile, Alabama. Sorry, ran out of breath there. Spring Hill Hospital, Mobile, Alabama. Beside me is my good friend Fritz Scherer. He's the owner of BMT Divers and also the safety director for the diving program at the West University, Florida Underwater Archaeology Program, correct? Sort of, kind of?
Don't leave biology out.
Okay, I got the biology part too. No, I didn't know. So, biology too. So this evening, what I'm going to be talking about is what you need to plan for 2021 and your emergency action plans, your emergency dive plans. I'm going to be moving through this fairly quickly. I'm going to also be providing this to the community on the Emerald Coast on May 4th out of Destin, and another upcoming session in May. So I'm trying to get the information out to you as much as possible. If you're not aware, Spring Hill Medical Center in Mobile is your closest recompression facility. Next closest recompression facility along the Central Gulf Coast is going to be located in Orlando, Florida. From there, you have to go south, and then to the north, you won't get another facility that will treat diving injuries until you get to Duke University in North Carolina. And then to the west of me, you got Gulfport, Mississippi, and New Orleans. So very limited availability for recompression chambers in the event of a diving accident. One of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is have Divers Alert Network insurance. Julio has no financial interest in Divers Alert Network at all whatsoever. But I can tell you that a helicopter ride to my facility is going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars. And that's usually how you're going to get to me if you're diving anywhere west of, say, Destin. So keep that in mind. So without further ado, let me go over some basic stuff that you may or may not know. 3 million recreational divers in the U.S. You have millions of dives annually throughout the U.S., particularly along the beautiful Gulf Coast here. We also have about 700 to 1,200 U.S. and Canadian residents that get treated for diving injuries each and every year. Approximately 80 fatalities between those two different countries, between Canada and the U.S. annually on fatalities. So you can't see my screen. Those of you that are on Zoom can. Those of you that are on Facebook, let me give you a rundown of the diving accidents of 2020 for the Gulf Coast. So in Orlando, you had Advent Health Hospital. They treated 11 DCI patients. West Jefferson Hospital, located in New Orleans, 11 DCI patients. Spring Hill Medical Center, Mobile, Alabama, 11 DCI patients. Seems to be a very popular number for 2020. Gulfport, Mississippi, since it's right in the middle of Spring Hill and West Jefferson, they got 3. Pensacola NAS treated 1 DCI, and this was an active duty military personnel. Then in South Florida, West Palm Beach, Florida, you had 35 to 40 diving injuries that were treated. And then Mercy Medical in Miami, a total of 83 diving injuries that were treated there. So one of the questions I have as a medical professional is there really more diving excursions in South Florida than there is in the whole panhandle? I mean, yes, the population density is much greater, or the doctors down there more greater attuned and knowledgeable on diagnosing the DCS patient. Because that sure seems to be a very big difference, about 33 from New Orleans all the way out to almost Orlando. And all of a sudden we're looking at a 10-fold increase. So let's talk about pulmonary barotrauma and arterial gas embolus. These are related to Boyle's law of gas. We know that as we increase pressure, there's a corresponding decrease in volume. This is basic gas laws, and something you need to be extremely aware about in the recreational diving world and scientific diving world. So when I say inversely proportional, if I decrease the pressure, I would expect a corresponding increase in that volume. The relative greatest change that occurs is in those last 10 feet or the first 10 feet, however you want to look at it. So as soon as you start diving, those first 10 feet is when you feel the greatest pressure changes to any kind of air-filled spaces. So that includes your frontal sinuses, your maxillary sinuses, your sphenoid sinuses, and your ears. And that's where you feel it most often, is inside your ears, right? So conversely, if I'm coming up and I breath hold, those last 10 feet, I'm going to expand almost 33%. So I could lay down at the bottom of a pool at as little as 4 feet of water, take a breath from a compressed air source, and then hold my breath and stand up and blow both my lungs and call it pulmonary barotrauma. So we have to be very careful. So it's not always about depth. Oh, they went down too deep. It's usually not the too deep part that gets you. It's the coming up part that gets you. For those of us that can see on Zoom, the cause of death, this is 814 deaths that were looked at in the Americas from scuba diving fatalities. And what I want you to note on this slide is 70% of the fatalities weren't related to anything as far as DCS. They were related to drowning. Then we look at arterial gas embolus being the next biggest contributor to that, and cardiac issues. Notice that those are almost identical at almost 100 fatalities each during that year, or those years, I should say. But what we're looking at is the AGE is very difficult to discern from the cardiac symptomology when it comes to an emergency room. Always be sure and let your physician know when you get to an ER that you've been diving, and please have your dive computer with you if you can. If not, have someone there that can relay your dive profiles to the physician. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the physicians are not going to know what you're talking about. But do let them clue them in on things like, I felt worse when I got near the surface. My symptoms started an hour after I came to surface. Those two things trigger a lot of different tips or giveaways for us as we start trying to diagnose what's going on. So relatively few DCS cases. You know, scuba diving is a very safe sport for the most part, but it is no different in what it does to the body and physiology as in going into outer space. So it's nothing to be trivial about. It's nothing to not take your time and be very well educated about what's going on with your safety, because you're completely reliant on your training and your equipment. And if you fail on either of those two, it can cost you serious injury or your life. So what I see a lot of is not the healthy diver coming into my facility. Typically what I see are divers that are in poor health. Four biggest reasons that we see diving fatalities is diver health as related to obesity, high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, and just a general lack of fitness. Swimming is a tremendous workload on the heart and cardiovascular system. You need to be in good physical condition in order to be doing this sport. You're not just going to be floating around chasing Nemo. You got to fight currents. You got to do some work with it. Another common cause of fatalities, procedural errors related to buoyancy control or rapid ascents. Rapid ascents are going to lead to arterial gas embolus, and arterial gas embolus ends up being a very bad presentation that you may or may not make it to my facility on. Missed decompressions are also common. When we have missed decos, you have an elevated inert gas load that can cause bubble formation in your cardiovascular system. And then this can lead to a whole cascade of different problems of very subtle symptoms that can be hard to diagnose for a doctor if you don't let them know that you're in the water. Environmental issues also play a factor. Cold water, sudden storms. If you are watching this on the Gulf Coast of the United States, we are just now entering our wonderful summertime pattern of afternoon thunder showers. So if you're out on a boat, these lovely little storms can pop up out of nowhere, and they can be torrential. So this can cause divers to have to come up very quickly, or if you're holding on to a buoyancy control rope and you get snatched out of the water by a 10-foot wave, then guess what? Bad things are going to happen again. So we need to be careful with those. And lastly is improperly maintained equipment. You know, I just mentioned that it's no different than being a in outer space, and you know the precautions that are done by all governmental agencies as related to the space program. So the same type of attention to details needed if you're a tech diver, if you're a recreational diver. You are dependent on your life support, and your life support needs to be well maintained. So for those of you who are not divers who might be listening, we're, some of the terminology that we're using, DCS, is a disease state that is secondary to gas expansion of the dissolved inert gas into your tissues. An arterial gas embolus is when gas bubbles enter the arterial system, either from pulmonary barotrauma, where I've breath held, I've had an overexpansion of the lungs, I got tear in the vasculature, and now I have air entering the arterial system, or a cardiac defect. About 30% of the population walks around what is called a patent foramen ovale, which is a hole in the atria of the heart that closes when you take your first breath as an infant. Well, like as I said, 30% of us, that hole doesn't close and it stays open, and this can allow the transfer of bubbles from the left to right shunt, or from the venous side to the arterial side. And if I say the term DCI, which is decompression illness, it means that it's either DCS, decompression sickness, or arterial gas embolus. In other words, it encompasses both those disease states. So some of the bubble sources, mentioned the PFO, mentioned some vascular abnormalities. Most common that we see is from pulmonary barotrauma. You can see the pulmonary barotrauma is going to lead to those smaller bubbles, as I was describing. In the dissolved gases, it gets into the venous blood and then comes across on through the PFO. Our primary concern when we have these expanding gases is that arterial gas embolus. When you have an arterial gas embolus, it presents like a stroke. It's a neurological injury. It has cut off the blood supply to the brain. And hopefully one of the other presentations, I'll actually show you a rabbit model with air bubbles going into the brain, so you can see what it looks like and how it builds up and just blocks the blood from going in. And this is what's happening inside your body when AG occurs. Some other things that we can see are pneumothorax, which is simply a collapsed lung, or mediastinal emphysema, which is where you have air underneath the sternum and around the heart and around the sternum. Anytime that we get gas that goes up to the brain, we call that a cerebral arterial gas embolus, or a CAGE. Some of the neurological signs and symptoms are much like what you would see with a stroke: a confusion, difficulty with walking, their cognitive functions just not right. They don't know what day it is. They don't know where they're at, who they're with, loss of coordination, loss of consciousness. If someone loses consciousness within 5 to 10 minutes after surfacing, immediately think that they've associated with an arterial gas embolus. And ultimately, it can lead to death. Just because you have an arterial gas embolus doesn't necessarily mean that you have pulmonary barotrauma. If I take a chest x-ray of you in the emergency room and you present with neurological symptoms, and I don't see any damage to your lungs on x-ray, that doesn't mean that you didn't have an arterial gas embolus. Only half of those people are going to be identified that way. So we can't use that. We go by your symptoms and the sequence of events that led to those symptoms. There's an illustration of what happens. You can see that there's a tear in the vascular lining, and that is how the bubbles enter into the arterial system. That is an x-ray showing a collapsed lung. The black around the right lung is air. Well, you think air needs to be in the lung, but it needs to be in that gray stuff, not the white stuff. So that's free air in the lung cavity, and that's not supposed to be there. There's a black outline around that heart. Hopefully you can make that out. That is called the pneumomediastinum, and that is air around the heart. Well, what happens with that is your heart can't pump if there's air that's splitting it or holding it still. All bad things. Bubbles inside your arterial system or your venous system are not spherical bubbles. They're elongated. They're like hot dogs. They're like a subway train shooting through a subway tunnel, except that train is scraping up against the walls of the tunnel. So that's what's happening inside your bloodstream. The bubbles are scraping against the lining of the blood vessels And this causes an inflammatory reaction. This causes platelets to get released, and then they aggregate, they clump together, they make little clots. So not only are you dealing with the bubbles, you're dealing with the clots. So this is loads of fun because they get caught everywhere. And that's what causes the pain. This is what causes the ischemia or the hypoxic damage that's done to the tissues. So with natural progression of an arterial gas embolus, you have a symptomology, you can have early death, or the patient can become static. I had a patient that was transferred to me from Panama City who spent 9 hours in the emergency room at Bay Medical before he was airlifted to me, and he was completely paralyzed on the right side. He stayed paralyzed on the right side for 2 days. On day 2 is when he regained his function after receiving 2 hyperbaric treatments. This is a severe neurological event. It can cause death. This gentleman was very lucky and he made a full recovery. So one of the biggest difference between an arterial gas embolus and decompression illness is that an arterial gas embolus, 85% of the time, is going to occur within those first 5 minutes. 100% of the time, you can see symptoms of it within the first 10 minutes. The more serious, this is the more serious of all the neurological symptoms, is loss of consciousness and when we have paralysis and other types of neurological symptomology. Now, DCS, on the other hand, takes longer to present. About 50% of the cases within the first hour, 90% of the cases less than 6 hours, and within 24 hours, 100% of the cases are going to show their symptoms. That doesn't mean that the person who's having them is going to acknowledge the symptoms, but they're having symptoms. So what can those symptoms be? Fatigue. I'm not thinking clear. I got a shoulder pain, but man, I was pulling on that cable hard, or I was lifting those tanks. So it's very easy to attribute it to something else besides the DCS. So you have to be knowledgeable on your dive profile. Was I near the limits? Was I pushing the envelope? Was I being conservative? What type of diving was I doing? Was it very vigorous? Was there a lot of currents? The more workload that I do, the more I'm absorbing that inert gas. Pre-treatment for these injuries is simple. And the only thing you can do until you get to a hospital is you provide surface level oxygen at the highest percentage you can. You should have 100% oxygen on every boat. All the patients, and I've treated over 200 patients in my career with decompression illness. That unfortunately puts me near the top in the United States and top in the world in treating diving injuries. And I'm telling you, the people that do the best are the ones that have had oxygen en route. They have the less treatments, follow residual treatments for They have less recurring treatments for residual treatments. They have better resolution and no long-term deficits on those. A pneumothorax can be treated with a needle decompression. This is more for isolated scenarios. If you're diving in an isolated scenario, I would definitely want the diver medic on the team to have the ability to do a needle decompression of a pneumothorax. Again, some of you can't see what we're seeing on the Zoom and on the Facebook decompression, get them to a hospital. Once the lungs are stabilized, we're going to treat them with hyperbarics. Now, DCS is when you have remember, decompression sickness is when you have a decrease in the ambient pressure, but you have an increased pressure gradient of dissolved inert gas. So in other words, my tissues, as I'm diving, are absorbing the inert gas, and it might be helium, it might be nitrogen. It's anything but oxygen. And inert gas is a gas that your body doesn't metabolize. The most common gas that we're going to be absorbing is nitrogen. So we have to allow for that nitrogen to release from our body, to off gas. That's what diving tables are all about in a nutshell, is simply given enough time for the different compartments within the body to off gas this inert gas. Decompression sickness can arise in compressed gas divers. We've treated aviators. I was on standby today for the splashdown of SpaceX, which has been delayed another week or two. We're the only facility on the Gulf Coast, unfortunately, that can provide support to the SpaceX program for their astronauts, because we're the only ones between here and Tallahassee that do that type work. So there's a picture of all our different sources. So how do we diagnose decompression sickness if you come to us? We look at your dive tables. Is it a provocative dive? What are the repetitive dives? What was your surface interval? What is the proximity of symptomology to the time of decompression? What clinical signs and symptoms are there? So one of the things that I have nice discussions along the diving community with is, well, what's a provocative dive? Well, I guess it depends on the diver. And that could be difficult to determine. But as rules of thumb, what we look at in the medical community is multi-level dives, dives that are strictly by computers and not tables. We generally use the 120 rule if I'm triaging over a phone or a call that we're getting. So if there were 60 for 60, I'm using that as my measure, or 90 for 30. And I sort of can guesstimate from that where you are on the dive table. I'm not going to nail it down until I'm actually looking at your profile and then looking at dive tables to determine what was done. Why do we use dive tables? Well, dive tables, United States Navy dive tables are the only human trial dive tables. And then, oh, we have a call from Metallica. Hold on. Metallica went away. And so the Navy dive tables is what we use as our standard in dive medicine in medicine. And when we're looking at the Navy dive tables, there were human trial, and they're done in the safety of the diver. In other words, we err on the side of the diver to be conservative. That's the way the Navy does it. Well, why would the Navy do it that way? Well, they've been doing a lot of research since the 1940s and 50s on this stuff, and they sort of got it down pat by now. And they still expect 1 to 3% of their divers to get a diving injury related to decompression illness, even if they follow the tables. So as conservative as their tables are, they still expect a percentage to take a DCS hit. And these are young, healthy adult males and females. So if you extrapolate that to the recreational diving community, it doesn't take too long to get to a provocative dive. Short surface intervals, using air versus enriched air. You're safer with enriched air, keeping in mind that you have to understand oxygen toxicity, and reverse profiles. So all these things are things that we look at whenever we're looking at a diving injury. So it's a lot of information gathering, then physical examination, and neurological assessment. The manifestations I gave you earlier, as far as time segments. And when we look at the DCS symptoms, you can see that they're all over the place. It can be anything from confusion to weakness, trunk pain, extreme fatigue, visual changes, shock, chokes, skin rash or itch, and joint pain. Numbness and tingling are the most common ones that we see. Early presentation, it usually correlates with more severe symptoms. You want to initiate first aid, again, 100% O2, put the patient in a recovery position and try to give them fluids. A lot of dehydration is associated with this type of presentation with DCS. So if you can get the patient to drink fluids, great. When they get to the hospital, we're going to do this intravenously through an IV. And of course, we're going to take a physical exam and evaluate the patient. Now, when we look at an overview of what the management pre-hospital is, and this is from medical experts from all over the world. I'm fortunate enough to sit on the diving committee for the Undersea Hyperbaric Medical Society, where we come up with all these lovely little suggestions for the diving community as medical experts on it. And we work in conjunction with Divers Alert Network. One of the biggest things I can tell you is you got to have an emergency action plan. And what I mean by that is know where your recompression facilities are, how long it's going to take, how far am I going to have to travel. So if I live in Pensacola, Florida, but I'm diving off Panama City, I need to be aware that if something happens, I'm going to be airlifted or ground ambulance from Panama City to Mobile, Alabama. And this can cause all kinds of logistical problems for people. Also, it's very expensive to get a helicopter ride from Panama City to Mobile, Alabama, in the neighborhood of about 5 to 10 grand if they give you a discount. So I'm not quite sure what the price is, but my whole point is you want to have Divers Alert Network insurance because they're the only insurance that I know of that help offset that cost of transportation in the event of a diving emergency. Also, make sure your dive boat has oxygen. You can get these lovely little placards from Divers Alert Network. They're plastic. You can write on them with a erasable marker, and as your information changes, you can update it. Always report to your nearest emergency room. You may not be having an incident with DCS. It might be a heart attack. It might be a stroke. And so that needs to be stabilized first, and then you're brought to us. So don't bypass your nearest emergency room to get to us. It could be something else. I've showed you how it can mimic other things. Here's some of the treating facilities that are located along the Gulf Coast. Advent Hospital in Orlando. Their number is 407-303-6611. Blake Medical Center in Bradenton, Florida, 941-792-6611. And I can tell you that Bradenton, Florida would not release their information on how many diving injuries they treated. Take that for what you will, but they were the only hospital I contacted that wouldn't say how many they treated. And then ourselves at 251-344-9630. Who should be seen? Anybody that feels unwell after diving should be consulting their doctor. Don't go home and say, well, I got a headache and it just won't go away. Let me take a cold shower and I'll feel better, and I'll take some aspirin, and I'm gonna take some Tylenol, and oh shit, it's day 3 and I'm still feeling bad. And then you show up, because then the injury, it may be permanent at this point. So the longer you delay, the more chances that there can be long-term sequelae or injury to you. This is an example of neurological checks pre and post. Again, you can get this from Divers Alert Network. It is very handy. No one's going to remember all this stuff except a paramedic or EMT. Diver medics know this by heart, but your normal layperson's not going to remember this. So it's always good to have a checklist. So you can do a neuro checklist on your buddy before you go diving, check afterwards, and you'll note any problems on this neurologically if there are problems. 100% O2, side recovery position. And why do we want to give O2? Well, it accelerates the elimination of the inert gas, of the nitrogen in your tissues. It also helps oxygenate the injured tissues. This has been proven in a couple of different research that's been done and published in the Undersea Biomed repository. Make sure that you have enough oxygen. Wherever you're going out on your boat, you got to figure you're going to need enough oxygen to get you back to shore. Enhanced air is better than no oxygen at all. So we're breathing 21%. If I got a tank that's sitting there at 30, 68, 32 mix, guess what? That's better than just breathing air. So get on that. I discussed trying to push liquids, avoid caffeinated drinks, avoid alcoholic drinks before diving. Get well hydrated, get some rest. You're going to be out in the sun. You're going to get very hot. You're going to lose a lot of fluids. Push fluids orally. There can be, again, a wide variety of different symptoms when we're looking at DCS. Most people discount the mild DCS as limb pain, rashes, fatigue, and this is really like a sports injury. And it usually resolves on its own. I cannot tell you not to receive treatment for this. It would better to err on the side of safety and get seen for this, any of these presentations. But anytime you have neurological symptomology, numbness, tingling, loss of consciousness, very sharp pains, you need to be seen. Something bad's happening and you don't want it to be permanent. So lastly, some safe diving tips. Be medically fit for diving, be physically fit for diving. Don't dive when you're feeling unwell. Hydrate, insulate, avoid the deep dives, or be well trained to do deep dives. Reduce your depths during multi-level dives. We see reverse profiles all the time, and that's a good way to get a ride in my chamber. Ascend slowly, do your safety stops, and oh, wait, I'm getting a gift from Zoom. I'm sorry. Maximize your surface intervals, minimize your repetitive dives, report unusual symptoms, always dive with a buddy, and dive within your training and experience. And lastly, and most importantly, make sure your equipment's well maintained and in good working order. All right, so that was 2018. In 2018, we had 11 cases at Spring Hill. 2019, we had 10, and in 2020, 11. So we've been running pretty consistent. Gulfport Memorial didn't treat any cases in 2019, and NAMI here treated 8 cases of DCI that were active duty military and military dependents, 2 cases in 2019. That's what a treatment table 6 looks like. So if you come to my facility with a diving injury, this is what you get to buy. It's 4 hours, 55 minutes with that extension. It's a long time to be in the chamber. This is a table 5, 2 hours in duration, same depth, just a much shorter profile. And this is what we use each and every day within our community. U.S. Navy treatment table 9, we use it for wound healing, and we use it for tailing treatments after the initial table 6 on diving injuries. And that's all I got for y'all this evening. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope I provided a little bit of information. I'm going to stick on Facebook, but that's it for Zoom. And I'll stay on Facebook and we can answer some questions. Thank y'all for coming on. You got any questions? We're open to questions. You can, let me see if I can figure out how to unmute everybody. Nope. I'm clicking. Don't look. Let's see. Go ahead, Mark. Yeah. Oh wait, you're trying the same things I did. Well, does anybody have a question? You can type it in. You can chat, I think. Yes. Okay, there's a. You're welcome, Taylor. You're welcome, David. Yes.
Do you foresee any other facilities opening up along the Gulf Coast in the future?
What? So the question is, do I foresee any other facilities opening up in the future? Well, there's plenty of facilities on the Gulf Coast that are available, just none of them will treat diving injuries. And so the answer is, until it's mandated, I don't think so. Unless the community makes enough noise and puts enough pressure on the local elected officials and the chambers of commerce, I don't believe so, because it's not in a hospital's financial interest to do it, or at least in the way they see it. So why does my facility do it? It's because my ownership, we're a private hospital, and believe it or not, my owner decides that it's a service to the community that the community can't do without. But if at any time she decided to change her mind, that'd be it for that. So I don't understand why some of these other hospitals that are along the Northwest Panhandle pick the hospital between here and Jacksonville, don't feel that obligation to the diving community. They make millions, the cities and the communities make millions from the recreational diving industry, millions. I mean, it's in their own report to the Chamber of Commerce, but yet they don't feel the need to protect the diver in the event of a diving injury. And I've told you this, and you've heard me say it. I stopped fighting to fight for the recreational diver. I want to educate y'all. I want to help you as much as possible. But my focus shifted to the scientific diver, the Department of Transportation divers, the FWC divers. There's over 180 FWC divers in the entire state. So you mean to tell me if these people get hurt doing their job, that you're going to send them to another state, or they might die because the facilities weren't available to them? That includes law enforcement, fire rescue. I got to go over here and I'm going to do the same presentation for Mr. Sam Jackson over in Orange Beach, who's the fire chief over there, and his dive team. But yeah, I mean, even from Orange Beach, that's an hour transport. South Baldwin County Hospital has hyperbaric chambers. I can only say what we're willing to do. I don't know why they don't.
Yeah, the Escambia County Sheriff's Department has an incredible dive team.
Oh, absolutely.
If one of those individuals, those officers get injured, guess where they're going? To see you.
Well, I mean, I remember when Fritz and I first met was due to a fatality out on the Oriskany. And I came over and I met Mr. Clint Rutherford. And so here's a volunteer diver for Escambia County Search and Rescue diving down to the bottom of the Oriskany to recover a body.
That is correct.
And so this guy's putting his life on the line. I mean, we're talking 240 feet of water, right?
230. Yeah, I'm close enough. We're splitting hairs.
Yeah, I mean, it's deep. And there was no facility in the Pensacola area in case he got hurt. That's just not right to me. But that's me. I'm weird that way.
Yeah. Now I have a question for you. The days that obviously a hyperbaric facility has a lot of moving parts, a lot of mechanical parts, and you guys have to shut down on a regular basis for maintenance.
Yes, correct.
And I know I get emails from you when you were going to shut down, and you let me know what the duration of those shutdowns are going to be. And I know you do a blast email to a lot of different dive shops and charter operations throughout the area.
I do. I try to.
More, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement. Any of you that are interested in knowing when the chamber is open or closed, you probably need to reach out to your local dive center or charter captain that is affiliated with Julio and get that information. So you may not want to go out on a charter or a dive the weekend that the chamber's down for maintenance.
Yeah, I got an upcoming maintenance coming up, and so like I let SpaceX know that I'm going to be down on the weekend of 14, 15, and 16. We got to do our annual maintenance, and in January of 2021, we're going to have to do an acrylic change. Now these are custom acrylics.
2021 or 2022?
2022.
2022.
Yep. January I'll be down for 3 days, but that's $180,000 worth of acrylic that has to be changed on that. So yeah, I try to let the community know, and I folks, I mean, I just run a little unit of a small hospital, but I take the initiative to let the other facility that's covering for me know, because I want them to know where divers got to go. If I'm down, then you got to go to Gulfport, and if Gulfport's down, then you got to go to New Orleans. Point is, everyone needs to know, but there's no clear systematic way to do that. There's no system for it. So the only system is Julio sending out emails. Now, the best way I can tell you to always check, if you go to an emergency room, and I don't understand why some emergency rooms don't know this, but you have them call Divers Alert Network, period. It's like poison control. So Divers Alert Network knows where all the centers are that are open and when maintenance is going on and that kind of stuff. So they have an active list. Right now, that active list is down to 80 facilities, 80 facilities in the U.S. that are treating diving injuries in the entire continental U.S. That's crazy. Whole lot of land mass, just saying. So David's asking, what's the difference in the incidence between a recreational and professional diver? Well, the biggest thing is I see, when you say professional diver, David, can you elaborate? I mean, professional divers, to me, are the guys who are doing like offshore work, your underwater welders, those that are working for industry. Scientific divers I consider professional divers. So your search and rescue teams are, again, in my opinion, professional divers. But the guys that are offshore are mandated and covered by OSHA. Okay, so OSHA says if you're going to have diving operations, then you have to have on site a dual lock 6 ATA chamber. All right. And this causes a lot of misconception in the diving world. So that mandate of a dual lock 6 ATA chamber or 165 feet, people try to bring that and extrapolate it to the civilian world. It doesn't play that way. So when you have hospitals like Sacred Heart who says, well, we don't have the right equipment to treat diving injuries, or Pensacola Baptist who says the same thing, that we don't have the right equipment because we don't have the right diving equipment, a 6 ATA chamber dual lock, that's a lie. Because West Jefferson Hospital in New Orleans, who's affiliated with LSU School of Medicine, they treat in a monoplace chamber, the same as Pensacola Baptist, the same as Sacred Heart. So that's complete BS. I'll call them out. I've called them out in meetings, and I get called very bad, ugly names. Does that answer your question, or were you looking for something else, David?
He was asking and dive masters.
Yeah, well, yeah, dive masters, absolutely, man. Yeah, anybody that's into that makes their living diving. But think about it, David. You got a guy that's checking a bridge or a dam that works for the Florida Department of Transportation, and they're somewhere between here and Tallahassee. And a catfish that's 20 feet long comes up on him, scares the bejesus out of him. He jumps up and he pops his lung. Now he's got an AGE. 1 in a million chance. Who knows? But that guy's probably not going to make it to him. And he works for the state of Florida. And he's going to pass a lot of hospitals to get to me. That's all.
I guess it. So what I was thinking was that the recreational diver is likely to go a couple times a month, a couple times a year, depending on your location, your activity level. Whereas someone, and when I'm saying professional, I should have clarified, someone who makes their living diving, or who's on a volunteer, who's regularly in the water on a volunteer basis on behalf of search and rescue, sheriff's department, whatever else. Is there a greater incidence among those who dive more frequently versus those who dive less frequently? Maybe that's a better way to ask it.
I'm sure that's a good question, and I'd love to look it up for you, and I will. I don't know it off the top of my head. And that sort of leads back to what I said at the beginning. Does South Florida really have that many more diving injuries than the entire panhandle of Florida? I mean, so they treated last year between West Palm and Miami, 2 hospitals. And by the way, West Palm, same kind of chambers that I have. So they're 3 ATA chambers, and they treated 35 to 40 diving injuries last year. And then you had Miami treated 80 plus. So were there really that many more excursions in that south tip versus the entire panhandle? I find that hard to believe, but I don't know. So it's sort of like which came first, the chicken or the egg. So do you increase your chance diving more? Well, I would hope that you're more proficient. I would hope that you're keeping your equipment well maintained, but you're also rolling the dice more, right? I mean, it's a probabilistic event. A friend of mine who used to be the medical director of Divers Alert Network, Dr. Nicholas Bird, who's living in Malaysia now, diving every freaking day. That's his job. Anyways, that's what he said. Look, you got to think of DCS as a probabilistic condition. Well, what's that mean? It means that I'm rolling the dice. Now you want to stack the odds in your favor. How are you going to stack the odds in your favor? Well, you can dive conservatively. You can be well hydrated. These kind of things. That makes sense.
Yeah, I was just wondering if inexperience or lack of practice contributes.
I think it plays a big role.
I would think so too.
I was commenting today to Fritz, and I was at Kerry Freeland's shop, and again, I've really come to know a lot of y'all in the diving community locally. And so I was hanging out at a carry shop, and this young couple was buying some regulators, and they were just starting that. And the kids, and I say kid because I'm 56 now, and I'm looking at this young kid, and he wants to do tech diving, and they're showing him all the equipment, and I hear all this terminology being thrown at him, and I'm like, holy shit, there's no way this kid's going to remember all this stuff. He's going to die. And I know I'm being way too cautious, and that it's a lot safer than that, but that's because I see the end result of bad things. And so to me, I see it a lot, but it's actually very little, so it's unfortunately, there's only one treatment for it. That's recompression, right? So you're gonna have to come to me.
Really, to add into that, for the new divers, the ones just getting into it, kind of like skiing. You don't go from the bunny slope and right up to the triple black diamond, and you're going to wrap yourself around a tree. Same thing with diving.
Yes, it is. It is very tiered.
Take it slow.
Yeah.
Learn the basics before you jump in the water and decide to go out and shoot an 80-pound amberjack. Get comfortable with it. For the experienced divers, the one who've been doing this for a while, do not get complacent. Take time to make sure your gear is serviced. Make sure it's working properly. Can I stay hydrated?
Can I answer Matt? Matt?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you still there, man? So here's the question. Your question is, could you go back underwater if you start having symptoms versus going to Mobile? All right. So big controversy in the medical community. And it really boils down to remote diving. Then the question becomes, how do you define remote diving? So remote diving is supposed to be like when you're off in the Caribbean somewhere, or you're out in the South Pacific, and there's just no availability. Well, if push comes to shove, then you're supposed to do the best that you can and do in water recompression. All right. So that's your answer. In the CONUS, in continental United States, you're supposed to go to a medical facility. All right. So that's the definitive medical answer. So now define for me, what is a recompression oasis on the Gulf Coast? I don't know. At what point do you draw the line and say, I can go this way or I can go that way? For us, the line's Tallahassee. So if I can travel from Tallahassee to Mobile and I'm a diver and it was me, I'd rather go to a medical facility than try to do in-water decompression, because number one, I may not do it. Number two, the symptoms may not resolve. Number three, I may not have a diving injury. It could be something else.
It could be a heart attack or a stroke that you're having. So now it's only going to go bad if you try to recompress in the water and the symptoms get worse and you're in the water. Now it's
the only ones that I see that I know of that have tried to do in water recompression is the tech divers. That's a whole different breed of animal, tech divers. And they're very meticulous, very detail oriented. I would say the 99.9% of them are going to do everything absolutely by the book and the way it should, because that's how they got to that level. But I also say that it's a probabilistic condition. You can do everything right and shit happens. So you better be ready. Other questions? Are we down to one person yet? Mom, you can hang up now. I'm done now.
all right. I think you.
All right. Well, appreciate it, y'all. Look, there's going to be some more coming around, and we'll do it again.
Did a great job. Thank you very much, Julio, for coming by and chatting with us about that.
Most welcome. Most welcome. Enjoyed it.
Any of the people out there watching this evening, you know anybody in politics, anybody that you can complain to about the local hospitals not providing hyperbaric emergent care for diving and for other issues, even not diving related? Reach out, send letters, complain, do whatever you can, help Julio out to try to get a chamber over here operating that will help emergent care for diving accidents, and again, as well as other things. One of the things that we want to do here at MBT for you guys, if you have your own boats and you want to go out and you're going to be diving and you do not have an O2 kit, a Dan oxygen kit, if you want to come by and see us, Dan has a wide variety of kits available. We can go through, order you one, and we're willing to teach you guys how to do it. Normal class is what, Steve, $89. We'll do it for $49 once you get the kit in. Any of you guys that already have kits and been through an O2 class, don't hesitate to bring the kit in. Let us go through it, make sure everything's functioning properly. And we can do a quick refresher course with you. Go through some scenarios, take an hour. It'll be worth it. The other thing I would recommend too, if you do have your own kit and you feel you're proficient with it, have you checked it lately? As it's sitting in the bilge of the boat or in a cuddy, a cabin, or little hole somewhere on the boat, and you haven't even opened it up? God knows what it looks like when you open it. So I would go and check it and make sure it's operating. If you're going to be doing a big day of diving and you haven't looked at the kit in a couple trips, open it up, check it, make sure there's O2 in it, make sure that all the masks are working, make sure all the hoses are working. It only takes a couple minutes. If you're out there and something bad happens, guess what? If that kit's not operating, then you're not going to be able to help that person that's injured. And the quicker you can get them on pure O2 and get them back to shore and get them to EMS and let EMS get them to a local facility that's going to triage them and figure out if they need to go see Julio, that would be my recommendation. Make sure all your stuff's working. So we got the O2 kits. If you don't have one, come in and see us. We'll get you hooked up with it and we'll take care of making sure that you know how to operate it. If you got one, go ahead, please come by, bring it by, make sure everything's working, and we'll give you a quick little refresher on it. Believe me, there are people sitting in the room watching that we've done quick refreshers in the morning and it saved someone's life 2 hours later. Right. On that note, I'm pretty much going to finish things up with please this summer. Things are starting to heat up. The weather's getting good. Diving season, I hope, is going to be great. We're going to have one of the longer snapper seasons that we've had in many years. So get your gear squared away. Think about diving protocols. Think about your emergency action plan. Dive safely, stay hydrated. Just all the things that Julio went through. He did an amazing job this evening talking about this, and it make our job a lot more fun by diving as safely as you can, so we don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. And then on one last note, since snapper season is going to be a little bit longer this year, the Guns and Hoses spearfishing tournament is scheduled for, I believe, the third weekend in July. We're going to be hosting at the Pensacola Yacht Club, and we will get details out as soon as possible. So stay tuned to Facebook, watch our website, which, by the way, the MBT website is brand new and up and running. So go on mbtdivers.com, check it out. If you have any concerns or comments, or you just want to tell us how much you like it, let us know. We'll make whatever changes that we can, and we'll try to keep it updated on a regular basis. So on that note, everybody have a good evening, and we're signing out. Awesome job, dude. You condensed it.